Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream, first in a while. Wanted to get this in before I go off on my travels to Cambodia on Saturday. Very exciting. There'll be more on the channel about that. Going to do another Megalithomania tour to Angkor Wat. So looking forward to sharing some things with you about that. So I thought I wanted to get some things about Stranger Things on the screen. I did an article way back when the first series came out and was lucky enough to be on Richie Allen's show talking about it, or talking about the implications of it and little connections to it. So it seemed appropriate that now they've had the final series that I wanted to go through some of these themes again, because it taps into, as people that have watched before will know, I did the book on the lost child in literature and culture, and right from seeing the first few episodes of this series, it really seemed to tie in with so much that I've written about in my book. So these themes just keep repeating. So, and with the things that I've learned in recent years in, shall we say, conspiracy theory land, and things about the esoteric, it just all links in with the things that I did when I was doing my literature and culture studies, and which fed into the book. Hi, Green Tea. Thanks for popping in. Ben and Gary, good to see you all here. So, as I say, it's a follow-up years after from that first series. Now, my article had a subtitle, Will Got Lost in the Woods, obviously Will being one of the main characters who gets taken away into the upside down, and that's how one of the things that kicks off the first series. And I discussed how the lost child is such a prevalent figure in our culture and society. Now, very dark themes, unfortunately, although of course this isn't explicitly in Stranger Things, but I think this is deeper under the surface. I talked about paedophilia in the film industry, which is collectively known as Hollywood, and as sadly a number of things, this was a very good documentary. If people haven't seen it, I do recommend it. An Open Secret. It used to be available on Vimeo for free. I don't know if it still is, but very powerful. But sadly, it's something that is prevalent in so many walks of life, of course. But it seemed to me that Stranger Things had sort of gone full circle in a way, because maybe the lost child aspect wasn't so strong in the middle seasons, although of course it's still got children characters, so, and it's still going to be around those themes, but it seemed to have gone very much back full circle to the first series, in highlighting the way that children are vital to a connection between the material world and other dimensions, in whatever way you want to express that, whether you want to call it the spiritual, multidimensional in sort of quantum physics terms, what the physicist David Bohm called the explicate and the implicate order, and how these things sort of relate to each other. And that, for me, sadly, is why children are and have been used in these deep state government experiments that are the basis for the beginning of this series. And this is within the series. There's the Hawkins lab, which 11 escapes from, and these children were in these sort of versions of, well, MK Ultra is expressly mentioned within the first series, that it was all part of that. And hi, Pete. And this is something that I'll go into in a moment, but the other narrative thread, apart from these sort of government experiments that use children is the character Will, who's abducted and ends up in the Upside Down, like this alternate dimension, which is like a dark version of the real world. And in the final series, I mean, there will be not major spoilers. I'm not going to go in through what actually happens in the end if someone's not read the end of it, watch the end of it. Sorry, but obviously there will be a few things mentioned about things that happened during the final season. So I guess if you haven't watched it, watch and come back to this later. But in the final series, Vecna tells Will, who's obviously now 17-year-old, that he took him because he was weak and vulnerable, and therefore a suitable conduit for him to channel between the material world and the Upside Down. And it's sort of literally channeling, as he says, that when the young Will, when he comes back into the real world, he's still connected to the Upside Down. And it's actually in his dreams that he creates the tunnels underneath Hawkins while he's sleeping. And underground tunnels are something else that's something that very has a lot of connections, sadly, with deep state and allegedly some child experiments and that sort of thing. So Vecna says in the final series that he uses children as their minds are open and susceptible. But L, or 11, challenges him and says that he has underestimated that children are also strong and adaptable. And I think there are elements of both in the reason why the powerful abuse children. They want to use the vulnerability to feed off the fear which they create in their victims. But there is also an inner power within children. This is something that's inside all of us. But the pressures of life, physical contaminations from whatever poisons are in the atmosphere that they're putting into us, mental trauma, indoctrination, many of these things are engineered by those same people in power, and that dulls the spark within us. So when we're children, when we're innocent, that spark is still strong, that connection with what I like to call the ground of all there is, where reality or the material comes from, a deeper reality. So I think how these powerful, tragically used children, in many respects, is we're wanting to tap into this spark, this essence of everything, the creation of life that is in everything. They want to tap into that, and they want to use that to enhance their own power, whether it's to make themselves live longer or just to give themselves greater strength and enhance their ability to control everyone else. So the evil character, if you like, Vecna, in Stranger Things, he uses children to draw some sort of psychic power. And the government, the military and the government scientists in the final season, they're using blood from Kali, who is mentioned a bit more about her name, obviously relating to the Hindu goddess, but the character was also known as 8, who was another child experimented on, who has these psychic powers from these government experiments. And they're taking the blood from Kali and they using it in the same way that they also, it's revealed that they used it from this character Henry Cleo, who becomes Vecna. They're using that blood to create a new series of children with psychic powers. So that idea of taking blood, we know that sounds similar to what some people say that the powerful do with fluid, shall we say, from children who are under fear, and use that to enhance their own power. So in the final season, obviously the original kids, they're now in their teenage years, like Will. So in the final season, Vecna / Henry needs a new generation of young victims in order to bring about his plan to draw another world from an alternative dimension, which is one of the plot lines. So again, it's using these children. He needs to use these children as a source of power to somehow channel it, to break through to the alternate dimension. So there's in the final season, there's like a new generation of younger kids, and it's sort of led by Holly, who is the sister of Mike, one of Will's friends from, obviously, major character, and Nancy Wheeler, his sister. So in the previous series, their sister Holly has just been a tiny little kid, so only just in the background really. But now she's a little bit older, and she's got, quite a spirited kid, but she's the new protagonist, and she's the main one, if you like, or the first one at least, that Vecna Henry abducts into the Upside Down, because he wants to form this. He needs this group of 12 of these kids, so obviously that's a significant number, 12, and he makes 13. So there's various associations to that. Wasn't that the Last Supper supposed to be 12? Yeah. 12. Was it 13 with Jesus? Or so anyway, and there's all this symbolism with 12 disciples plus Jesus. So there's all these connections here. As there are throughout all the series, and this season particularly, with various religions, symbolism, motif, folklore. So much is thrown in there. As I say, one of the characters who's like from an Indian background, who was one of the kids that was experimented on. Her name happens to be Kali, and of course they could have chosen quite a few other names, but that, they chose a significant, powerful goddess name. There's sort of reference throughout. I mean, this character Holly, I would say there's significance in her name. The holly plant,
Hollywood.
Well, there's Hollywood, yeah, as I've mentioned already, for the nefarious reasons there, and the interesting things there, wasn't it, about the I think Jordan Maxwell, amongst others, said that name was chosen because Hollywood was what was used by, whether it was Druids or
they make wands out of it.
Yeah, they use it to make wands, so it's got these magical properties. So that's where it came from, for the name of the entertainment, the film industry, which obviously casts enchantment, shall we say, and is used to make people see things in a certain way, and in the sort of Disney terminology, capture your imagination. So there's that association with Holly, but also, going back to the Holly King, as I talked about in my Yule chat, there in the pagan times, there was the perpetual fight of the seasons between the Holly King and the Oak King, and the Holly King ruled from the autumn equinox until his power peaked at the winter solstice, obviously not long ago, around the 21st of December. So the opening season of Stranger Things is set around Christmas, and then the second at Halloween. And this final series, well, it wasn't set around Christmas, but obviously it aired over Christmas and just into New Year. So there's definite significances around that time of year, I think. So there's a bit of a nod to that with Holly's name. So she's captured by the Demigorgons, taken to Vecna in this alternate dimension. And when she's first there, I mean, you can see a little bit in the picture there. I don't know if I can zoom in. I'm not sure I can zoom in, but
you can, just like you would in a normal document.
Oh, I've over zoomed. There we go. All right. So she's got a cloak. She gets a cloak on. The way she's dressed is very much like a fairy tale character. A bit like Alice in Alice in Wonderland, and other fairy tale characters that I'll mention in a minute. And there's also, when she's in this house where she is with Henry, there's Sorry, apologies. I'm just getting me zooming right. There's also a Disney film poster in the background of a film version of Alice in Wonderland, just to emphasize the fact that they're connecting it with all these little hidden stories and folk tales and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of theories of an esoteric nature about Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, who pen name was Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. There's also some not so nice stories about him, going back to the paedophilia aspect. So I won't necessarily go into that now, but I think there's some disturbing aspects about him possibly. He based his original manuscript was called Alice's Adventures Underground. It's supposed to have been based around, I think it was the daughter of a friend of his who was called Alice. Alice's Adventures Underground, that makes me think of the Upside Down, which is what this alternate dimension is called in Stranger Things. And of course, the story Alice in Wonderland, it's about this young girl being drawn into a parallel nonsense world where everything's inverted. And of course, we get from that the phrase down the rabbit hole, which is a staple for all us crazy conspiracy theorists. And it's used by people, I suppose, from both sides to either say, oh, we've gone down a rabbit hole and we've found out loads of things about what's the truth behind this, that, and the other. And I guess people on the other side who see us as being completely bonkers would say, oh, they've fallen down a rabbit hole and they've just got completely lost in fantasy land and they've lost all touch with reality. So I think often the truth is somewhere in between, isn't it? I mean, rabbit holes can take you down a blind alley and get you lost in fantasy land, but also we know that there's very much truth in there, and peeling back layers and finding what really lies beyond a lot of the deceits and deceptions that we're fed. And there's also a little interesting link right back to I think it was the very first episode of the very first series, when the dodgy people from the security forces are trying to recapture Eleven, who's escaped from Hawkins' lab. She finds a way she gets into she's sort of taken in by this cafe owner, and he's sort of trying to look after her, and he sees that she's, you know, distressed and she's wearing a hospital gown. So he does like the conventional nice person, what you would do, thinking, right, I'll phone up social services to come and get them, but the call's intercepted, which is a nice little, well, I'd say nice little, but it's on the side, there's so many references to sort of technology and how that used for manipulating and listening in and communicating and that sort of thing. But anyway, they turn up to the cafe and kill the poor cafe owner. And he's playing in the background Jefferson Airplane, one of my favorite groups. And one of my favorite songs, White Rabbit, is playing on in the background as they shoot the poor guy dead, and Eleven makes her escape, and all the rest of it.
When he's being shot, they do actually mention that line about the men on the chessboard. That's actually the line playing. Right.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I was going to mention later, but in all the series, at certain points, quite frequently, there is the checkerboard chessboard floor, which we know is used in Freemason lodges. I know it's seen in so many different films and TV. It just appears, and of course, it's a pattern of flooring.
It was over the top in the last series. It was on their shoes. It was on everything.
Yeah. So definitely lots of references there to Freemason, that sort of thing. And I mean, the White Rabbit song, obviously, with Jefferson Airplane, it was San Francisco in the late 60s, the whole psychedelic movement. You know, it's got the line about feed your head. I mean, I love it. It's one of my favorite songs. Grace Lee's voice is amazing. But yeah, there's obviously references to psychedelic drugs, and then so much that I've read more recently has talked about how the counterculture movement around the 60s, the drugs, basically it was like an extension of the MK Ultra program.
It's a shame there's not a book about it being read by somebody.
Yes, if you haven't actually read Weird Seas Inside the Canyon by Dave McGowan, great book. There is a brilliant reading of it.
It's not brilliant, it's awful. I've had to turn the comments off because everybody's so it's horrible.
But you've also had nice comments, also good comments. People say,
well, I can't say Mexican names. I'm not going to apologise. I like to see them say Wiltshire names.
So if you're prepared that names will be not quite as they're supposed to be said, then yeah, there's a free reading of it on this channel. So that there's all those connections again around MK Ultra. As I say, that so much has been written how was sort of these things were promoted by the CIA and other covert forces to basically to go on the wider population in America and obviously around the Western world. And it was about sort of pushing a certain mentality, and it was basically mind control writ large. And the music, the whole counterculture was part of that. And drugs, obviously, the psychedelic drugs were obviously promoted as being part of that as well. And as I say, MK Ultra is explicitly mentioned within the first series as that being a program which is linked to what happens to 11, and she gets taken from her mother, who is in one of these programs, and she sort of signs something to get some money because she's poor, and they go these experiments, and she's sort of fed these drugs, and maybe, as we find out later, might have been blood from someone that's got these powers to try and induce that. And then 11 is taken away from her and taken straight, to this lab as part of this program. And we know tragically these sort of things happen far too often in the past, and sadly very probably still now. But also another very significant, interesting book, which I do recommend if people haven't read it already, is Chaos by, I was going to say by Charles Manson, but sorry, I do apologize for this being a bit off wonk. So Chaos by Tom O'Neill. I did think it was a really excellent book. He's researching it for like 20 odd years, and he got obsessed with it. It was just like supposed to be writing a magazine article for, I can't remember what magazine it was, but just something that was just like a fairly surface level thing, just talking about the film industry, music industry, and just do a quick article about Charles Manson because it was coming up to a particular anniversary for the murders or something like that. And he got so down the rabbit hole with all these bits of research and just finding out so much about the official stories about Manson and about what happened with the Tate murders. Everything really just got deeper and deeper. It's one of those things, it's quite sort of fragmented in some ways, I guess, not unsurprisingly, because it was bits of these research that he spent like half his life working on. And also it's one of these things where he keeps coming up to bits where he's saying, I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I don't want to go into conspiracy theory, but I couldn't help getting through this and thinking, hang on about this. And basically a lot of it, I would think, well, actually a lot of the crazy conspiracy theorists have already said things like this, but basically uncovering connections between the CIA, people who involved with the MK Ultra program, which has been admitted to now, although I'm sure not to the level that it actually occurred, and supposedly it all stopped, but probably carried on in other forms that we don't know about. But there has been an official acknowledgement that there were experiments on American citizens under this MK Ultra program. But people involved with this were then sort of connected or around the scene around San Francisco, and this lead up to the whole psychedelic movement. And Manson was there in San Francisco at that time, and he was quite prominent and being linked up with people involved with these. I won't go into express detail about now, but I, as I say, just another link there. And obviously it was a link there, this white rabbit, and that obviously took its terminology from Alice in Wonderland, but very much it's something which links back in to these darker areas around mind control, that whole 60s thing.
It's in the original Manchurian Candidate as well.
What is?
The white rabbit and the cards and all of that.
Oh, I see. I was going to say not the song, because that was later, but you mean the symbolism. Yeah, I think it's something that's often thrown into sort of programming and that sort of thing.
Matrix.
Yeah, I think we are all part of a big program. Green tea is just an ever enlarging scientific experiment, really. Now, carrying on from this aside, as I keep going down the rabbit hole, but there's a sort of connection back as well to that whole 60s psychedelic scene, which, as I say, seems to have been bound up with MK Ultra, etc., and that is like the main star of the series. You know, certainly when it first began, before obviously the other stars were kids who've now become famous, but Winona Ryder was the main star, and she was sort of now into her 40s, but she made her name as a child star, and she's spoken about how, you know, she felt a bond with the child stars in Stranger Things because they were like sort of 12 on the first season, and that's how old she was when she got into acting. And she's one of these families that had all these connections. Now, this is a creepy looking photograph. So this is her godfather, who's Timothy Leary, who was a friend of her dad. And obviously Timothy Leary, as most of you will know, was very prominent in the whole counterculture, psychedelic drugs thing. And many people believe that he was like a CIA asset, and it connected his promotion of these LSD psychedelic drugs was part of one of these sort of CIA programs to put it out in the general culture. Various other connections as well. I think the family were also friends with Aldous Huxley's wife, beat poets Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg obviously got question. You know, these people all sort of countercultural people that I was aware of because I was very interested. I loved all the 60s music. I still do love the music, but yeah, Ginsberg was strongly connected with, was it the Man Boy Love Association? So again, links with paedophilia. But yeah, again, there's all these interesting things about Winona Ryder, and then we saw something online. There was all this thing. I don't know if people remember. Winona Ryder at one point sort of went off the rails a bit and had a bit of a breakdown and did some shoplifting and went on trial there. I think it was in Australia that happened. Yeah, I think so. There seems to have been things that happened in the past. You know, they lived on a commune. Again, you know, in that sort of 70s period when she was just a kid, and she had all these weird and wonderful people. And that weird and wonderful is good, but some certain types of weird are not so wonderful. So that's another sort of connection, if you like, through the casting that they made that echoes back to the 60s, although of course the references really are in general about the 80s, which is where Stranger Things is set. But yeah, going to mentioning Dave McGowan, as we did earlier with Liz's reading of Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and Dave McGowan wrote about Timothy Leary. He said he was known for being a painfully obvious CIA asset, and also had a home in Laurel Canyon, which is the place where Dave McGowan concentrated on, where all these different musicians used to hang out, and also Hollywood actors and actresses. And Charles Manson was all connected with there. And he goes on, Dave McGowan, Tim Leary and Charles Manson were both incarcerated in California medical facility Vacaville at the same time in 1974 with a Dr. Donald Lunde, who was appointed by judges or retained by lawyers in some of the most infamous CIA, MKUltra mind control cases of the 20th century. So I do recommend, if you haven't already, have a listen to Liz's reading of the Weird Season Inside the Canyon, but Chaos by Tom O'Neill as well. Both fascinating books about these dark sides, the connections between CIA, MKUltra, and the film industry, music industry. So all these things tie in, I think, with the underlying themes around Stranger Things. But going on from my big old diversion there, but to go back to the idea of the sort of the folk tales, the fairy tales, as I mentioned, Alice in Wonderland, which is a more recent story, sort of from the 19th century. But as I say, Holly, she puts a cloak on. It's not a red one, but still there's this very fairy tale image. She's been abducted and taken to this land in this sort of alternate dimension. So it looks just like an old house where Henry lives, and he goes off and he says, oh, you can do whatever you want. And she's got all these clothes to dress up in. And he said, but never go in the woods outside the house. And that's a very fairy tale like prohibition. Don't go off into the woods. Holly breaks the prohibition in a positive way, because it's a good thing that she goes off into the woods, and she doesn't realize at that time, but Henry's the bad guy. So by going away in the forest, she meets up with someone. Yeah, well, yeah, I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but we've revealed but so someone who's going to reveal what's really going on. The little voice from the wilderness over there. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So I mean, it's quite interesting as well, because, as I say, she's resourceful. Holly, she's very much, so she's a young girl, but she is one like the other young characters. She's very much who works out problems, and she's quick-witted and all the rest of it. And that, going back, this obviously little drawing about Red Riding Hood, and in the original the oral folk tale, which Little Red Riding Hood was based on, it was known as Little Red Cap in a number of places. But it was ideas around a girl's transition to womanhood. But it narrated her overcoming the wolf or werewolf through her own cunning and resourcefulness. But this was changed by Charles Perrault, who created the first literary version of the tale in the 18th century. So whereas the original peasant girl is forthright, brave and shrewd, Perrault wrote Little Red Riding Hood as pretty, spoiled, gullible and helpless. That was Jack Zipes, who's someone who's written a lot about fairy tales. Her faults led her to be consumed by the wolf. So basically, she didn't do what she was told. She strayed from the path, and then she was punished for her deviance from the prescribed route and behaviour. And this new fate was given to the girl in line with new codes of socialisation that were developing in Perrault's time. So there's this sort of psychoanalytic reading by Bruno Bettelheim, who's quite famous for doing these psychoanalytic readings of old fairy tales. He complained that Perrault's tale is not and was not intended to be a fairy tale, but a cautionary story which deliberately threatens the child with its anxiety-inducing ending. Bettelheim goes on from this to assert that it seems that many adults think it better to scare children into good behaviour than to relieve their anxieties as a true fairy tale does. So, I mean, I referred in the article that I did back in 2016 when the first series was out. So and that was a very significant year, as you all know, for many reasons. That's when the first Stranger Things series came out. But I talked about how children being lost in the woods was this deep perennial motif, which is in so many fairy tales, folk legends, which are like our cultural DNA and go through stories that, you know, coming through to the present day, like Stranger Things. But you know, another famous one is Hansel and Gretel. Now, the thing is, I mean, Bettelheim was talking about the positive effects of fairy tales, and I can see where he's coming from in things like, so with Hansel and Gretel, there's the children are abandoned in the woods, and they're obviously threatened by this witch. But they manage to outwit the witch and turn the tables, and I think they get back to their dad at least. Obviously, there's different versions of lots of these fairy tales, but they prosper. They come out good, and all is well. So, okay, I can see from that, you know, Bettelheim saying, okay, so this is a lesson that they can break away from the parents, and they can grow up and be adults, strong in their own right and resourceful. And they can be successful and all the rest of it. But there is a much darker theme to so many of these fairy tales, like Hansel and Gretel, because it's the children are lost in the forest, not because they just happened to wander off and they were playing and they were a bit naughty. They actually get taken into the forest by the dad, I think, basically because the mum and dad are just desperate because they're so they're in so much poverty that they can't afford to feed their children. So they just decide that they have to abandon their children to the forest to presumably die because they can't feed them. I mean, that's just the most tragic idea to it. And I would say there's a very deep scar embedded in these stories and others like it, that a child is a burden on their parents, and the poverties and pressures of life cause some parents to be so desperate that they're forced to push them away, possibly to death. So I would say that is something that's very much goes into our cultural DNA, a psychological DNA. It's like a trauma that's passed on. And obviously there's a lot of real life trauma for those people in those circumstances. But also it's in the literature, it's in the folk tales. And I would say this is in a different way. It's that kind of mentality which has gone to the modern climate crisis agenda, which tells us that there's too many people on the earth and that we're overpopulated, we overconsume and place a burden on the earth's resources, and this is causing environmental devastation. And they say the answer is to reduce the population. So although they don't express this in the mainstream media, but what they're saying is that there's millions of people alive now on the earth. It'd be better off if they weren't alive. That's really what they're saying, but they don't put it in those terms. And to me, that's a sort of grand, writ large idea of like abandoning loads of people in the forest. And then, you know, it's like we can't. These people are too many, that they're causing a burden on the world or on society by existing. And lots of people like James Corbett have pointed out that a lot of this current green agenda, climate crisis, in the institutional forms at least, is just a delicate repackaging of eugenics. And it all comes out of that pseudoscience that advocated for sterilization of those people that were deemed to be mentally or physically unfit or somehow inferior. So that's gone on a long detour, but that's what we're here for. It's okay.
I'm not here for a detour.
Here for detox.
No.
Post-Christmas detox. But yeah, so it seems like these things all do link up. So, as I say, this all connects up from the first time when I saw Stranger Things, and I was compelled to write about it on my Lost Child blogspot. And there's a link to that, I think, somewhere on the channel. So my interest in the lost child as both constant tragic reality in human society and as a metaphysical archetype that transcends the material does go back to the 1980s. I mean, that's when I was a child. But in terms of me feeling this about all these deeper levels of it, sort of like an archetype, if you like, it went to the 1980s, but not because of memories of my own childhood. But when I was at university in right at the end of the 90s, and I was studying English literature, I was taken by this book by Ian McEwan, The Child in Time, which I haven't really read hardly any of his later stuff, and I get the impression that he's very deliberately gone away from a lot of things that were in this book. Anyway, this was really his first full-length novel. But to me, it weaves in a lot of really interesting ideas, and it's got a lot of these quantum physics ideas. There's a quantum physicist character, but it's all these ideas around childhood, and the main character his child has been abducted, so it's all around a lost child. But it weaves in around it all these ideas about quantum physics, nature of reality, and time, but also in the spiritual ideas as well, sort of metaphysical ideas, which is something which he's completely shied away from, Ian McEwan, since. He probably got into it a bit in this novel because at this time, it was written during the 1980s and it came out about 1988. He'd become a dad to 2 children at that point, but he had then, so after this book, he had a big split up with his partner, who was a spiritual healer and astrologer. So that's probably where some of these spiritual ideas sort of came in there. But yeah, got a very nasty breakup. And maybe that's partly why he sort of rejected everything, and he became like very hard science, and I wish I'd been a doctor or a scientist and all this sort of thing. And he actually wrote in a later novel called Saturday, which was sort of a post 9/11 novel. He actually wrote a disparaging comment about a scene in this Child in Time book about how the character despised. He didn't like fiction in general, but particularly not magical realism. And this one book, he read about a character who had like a time slip and then looked through a window and saw his own mother before he was born. And that is a scene from this book, The Child in Time. So he was basically disavowing what he'd previously written. But so much in this sort of resonated with me. And then other things that I read, it's just become this thing that I'm still looking at now around the lost child. And sadly, the things that I've found out even more recently when I've been researching conspiracy theory and the esoteric has made it even more. It just connects in different ways, but just makes it even deeper. That it's a fundamental thing to our reality, tragically, but also I think again why Stranger Things interests me is part of the social, the material reality of our world, but also it does go deeper and it connects into these esoteric levels. So on the material level, the 1980s, I think, was definitely a period of massive change. It was Thatcher and Reagan. So much of the social fabric of today's society, the 1980s was said to be when things changed. It was all this, traditional industries were breaking down. Obviously, you have all these things about, the miners' strike in this country, in the UK. Things like Thatcher and Reagan were sort of breaking down the unions. Things were the start of the globalization as we see it now, when things were being outsourced and to other countries around the world. And of course, the modern technological advancements started to take hold, which often a lot of them had beginnings are in the 1980s. Technological advances that just in those 40 odd years, it's just changed the world beyond all recognition, really. Throughout Stranger Things, forms of technology are prominent in just certain ways. It's done quite well, I think. Like the first series, Will's in the Upside Down, but he communicates to his mum. There's like the phone rings and it's just crackly sound, but she can make out that it's his voice. And then there's the sort of the famous scenes where they've got Christmas lights and he's making the lights move, and it's communicating to his mum that way. Electricity seems to cross the boundary between the normal world and the Upside Down, and you often get later episodes where people are in the Upside Down version of a place and they're sort of like turning a light on and off, and then the people in the real world version of the same place can see that light going on and off, and again it's a way of communicating between the two worlds. And I thought that might be a bit of a nod to the sort of electric universe theory, that everything's basically controlled by electricity and we're all electricity, and that's the universal glue that holds everything apart, everything together rather. Now I think hi Mab, I think there's a lot in the 1980s. I know, Ben, you've written about this around hauntology and Anthony Peake as well. I think a lot of things in also in terms of this breakdown in things like perceptions of time and things like the Mandela effect, things like that. A lot of people seem to attribute that as beginning around the 1980s, and some people have wondered if it's, or speculated or said that they do think it is something to do with CERN, or that and other these particle accelerators, large collider, CERN being the best known one and the biggest. And CERN, I mean, it had been in operation for some time before the 80s, but the 1980s was, I think, when a lot of it ramped up. And, I think there could well be something in there. And it was that there had been some disruptions to our physical reality or the perceptions of it and time. So just two really big sort of things that happened at CERN in the 1980s. On the 11th of June 1986, heavy ion collisions begin. Now, I posted my article on my blogspot, and I didn't realize at the time I had to go and sort of edit it, because I didn't realize I've just been talking, how I'm talking to you just now about all the idea about folk stories and Alice in Wonderland. And then I didn't realize at first that this experiment in ion collisions, the experiments were known as a Large Ion Collider Experiment. ALICE was the acronym that they used. So I don't know. We know that there's so many things with CERN, all the weird stuff, like the opening ceremony, which I know now isn't the opening ceremony for CERN. It was that Gotthard tunnel. That's it. But very, in the area of CERN, and I reckon that there's definitely connections there. And I mean, you watch that, and it looks like some Wicker Man on acid or something like that. It's just, so many levels. That's one of the things that Liz showed me, that when I was very first as a normie, and that sort of blew me away, and I just thought, wow, there's something else here. There's so many. And then there's the thing like the where they filmed some people doing this sort of ritual in the courtyard by CERN, or something like that. And at first, oh no, that was just a joke. And then, oh no, they actually were doing rituals, and there's some people that are, I don't know if they actually called them Satanists. They might not have done, but there's definitely a lot of deep esoteric stuff going on around CERN, around these experiments. So this experiment that was known as Alice, just as a bit of blurb, I think I took this mainly from the CERN's own website, but saying just after the Big Bang, the universe was too hot and dense for the existence of familiar particles such as protons and neutrons. Instead, their constituents, the quarks and gluons, roamed freely in a particle soup called quark-gluon plasma. Again, I talked before about plasma. There's so much around that, I think, which makes the supernatural a scientific probability. So in 1986, CERN began to accelerate heavy ions, nuclei containing many neutrons and protons, in the superproton synchrotron SPS, to study the possibility that quark-gluon plasma was more than just a theory. The aim was to deconfine quarks, set them free from their confinement within atoms by smashing the heavy ions into appropriate targets. The first experiments used relatively light nuclei such as oxygen and sulfur and produced results consistent with the quark-gluon plasma theory, but no real proof. In 1994, second generation experiments began with lead ions, and by 2000 there was compelling evidence that a new state of matter had been seen. Now, in the final season of Stranger Things, which I think is set in 1987, so it would be which would be like, say, a year after this was supposed to, or was happening at CERN, for instance. So in the final season of Stranger Things, there is a reference to exotic matter, which is given in the narrative as the means by which the alternative dimension of the mind flare is being drawn into our reality. So exotic matter, look that up, refers to materials or forms of energy that possess unusual properties, such as negative mass, negative energy density, or negative pressure. Unlike ordinary matter, which is composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons, exotic matter includes states like Bose-Einstein condensates, quark-gluon plasma, and antimatter. These substances are often studied in theoretical physics and have implications for our understanding of the universe and potential future technologies. So there's an obvious link there, which the writers, the makers of Stranger Things are alluding to. They're talking about exotic matter, so which involves potentially quark-gluon plasma, which is something which CERN at that time were experimenting with. And so exotic matter is typically associated with scenarios that require violations of known energy conditions, such as traversable wormholes and warp drives. These theoretical constructs challenge the standard framework of general relativity, which assumes the dominance of positive energy densities in matter. So exotic matter in this sense refers to hypothetical materials that exhibit negative energy density or other unusual properties, allowing for phenomena like faster than light travel, time loops, and the existence of traversable wormholes. And that's a quote from Exotic Matter, Theoretical Foundations and Potential Applications in Modern Physics by Vikram Kumar. So there's definitely allusions there, whether you choose to believe them or not, but they're definitely alluding there, I think, within Stranger Things to these quantum physics ideas and things that were happening in CERN in terms of things that were potentially, yeah, I mean, as Woody Black says, that maybe they weren't telling the truth, maybe they didn't find these things. There could be another element where these were lies, and again, it was a deception thing as to what they found and what the makeup of the universe is. We can't really trust them at all. can we? Anything really. But either on one respect, there's truth to the experiments and what they found and what they've done, and then that has huge implications for what is a universe, what is a reality, and or at the very least on a base level they're lying about it, and in which case why are they lying about it, and again what does that say about the people that are running things. Also at CERN in the 80s, in 1988, the Large Electron Positron Collider tunnel completed, Europe's largest civil engineering project prior to the Channel Tunnel. The two ends of this 27-kilometer ring came together with just 1 centimeter of error. So, and then this, I think this picture here that's coming up next is these dudes from the 80s, these scientists looking very pleased with themselves after there was this first injection into this collider. Says, I don't know if this is still the case, but what I think that they're building a bigger one, aren't they, at CERN? I don't know if where that is at the moment in terms of completion, but it was this thing in 1988 was the largest electron positron accelerator ever built. I think there's definitely something at CERN. I mean, whether it's just in terms of a symbolic level, as I say, with these strange ceremonies that they've found around there, but I do enjoy. Obviously, I'm only a layman person and not very haven't got the scientific knowledge.
Well, they've got the Hindu god Shiva outside of it.
They've also got
And
Shiva
then they've got
outside.
Kali.
Yep. Well, that's true. Yep. Shiva is outside. Is outside CERN.
Kali is one part of Kali is the destroyer of worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, that's the Oppenheimer quote, isn't it? After the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, he said, "You know, I'm the destroyer of worlds," from the Bhagavad Gita. So I think it's clear. I mean, as I can say, like just to go back to Ian McEwan, he sort of goes, "Oh, what are these like hard materialists now?" And it's all about science and all the rest of it and materialism. And he's thrown away, like within Child in Time, the physicist character is saying, "Oh, I think we should have like scientists should be appreciative of different experiences, like from mystics, poets, you know, and different kinds of existence." And there is so many comparisons that have been made, things like the quantum physics and how that relates to a lot of sort of belief systems, a lot of things that in Buddhism, Hinduism, that sort of thing. So I think again at the deeper levels of science, even if it's maybe theoretical physics, and to say things like plasma now, studies into that, I think very much. I think quite a few scientists now also they're doing experiments or looking at things like consciousness, that they're realizing that it can't just be reduced to a pure materialism. Still, though, in the mainstream, it's still presented as that anything that remotely goes woo, I suppose, or tries to link in science with something religious or spiritual is considered to be ridiculous. But I think in actual fact, a lot of very serious scientists do connect these things together and do think that there's something in it. Yeah, you're right, Team Green Tea. There probably will be a lot of people think that the representations of Shiva at CERN are blasphemous. But there was something else massively important that happened in CERN just right as the end, as the 80s were coming to a close. But it's quite incredible to think as well that the World Wide Web also began at CERN with this chap, Tim Berners-Lee, British dude, but he was working at CERN at the time in the 1980s. and he basically made the inventions that became the World Wide Web of this sort of browser, and so the internet as such had already been invented, but he's credited as being the inventor of the World Wide Web, and it was when he was working for CERN, which is quite another strange well, I don't know if he's, but again, it's something. The internet, the World Wide Web, well, obviously it's what I'm talking to you on now, but the changes to our world that have occurred because of the World Wide Web, positive and very, very many negative. Positive, yeah, I'm talking to you now, and yeah, so many people have found out about a lot of things, unveiling truths that have been hidden, and they found it out through the internet. But we know that it's being used as another way of control in many respects, and talked about MK Ultra before and how that fed in and was using the entertainment industry, film industry, and the internet is obviously another development of that. It's the entertainment industry in its new facet.
Well, it made Project Mockingbird, or whatever it was, Operation Mockingbird, easier to do.
Yeah, it's a way of putting things out which are instantly seen by millions of people around the world. If they're promoted in the way that they do when they want things to be viral and seen by millions, and then,
Viral.
Yeah. So again, the fact that came out of that same place as sort of like an aside to all the physics experiments, is a connection I think that we need to keep fresh in our minds, that it's often not thought about. But yeah, and of course, the terminology World Wide Web. I know David Icke often talks about the web of control. Just as an aside, in Stranger Things, you've got the mind flayer characters. This character from another dimension that's sort of behind it all. Going into people's minds, controlling them, getting them to do evil things as part of trying to control the world.
They keep talking about the hive mind, don't they? They mention that all the time.
Yeah, the hive mind, and well, yeah, and it's like a giant spider character, and this character Henry that becomes Vecna, this monster with psychic powers. He talks as well about being obsessed with spiders when he was a kid in the house and learning from them.
Which is a web.
Yes.
So, no, I'm just.
Yes, that's the connection I'm making. So, and on this, within Stranger Things, these webs become multi-dimensional, going through layers of reality and consciousness. And I suppose again, that type, the modern levels of computing, with quantum computing, and again we talked before about was it Geordie Rose?
Geordie Rose and D-Wave and all that bullshit.
Yeah, and they've again talked, like I was saying, about the ceremonies and the symbolism around CERN. They've also talked about
getting their information from fucking demons.
Yeah, and demons coming through.
Psychos.
And what's that? Is it Gildert? The other one?
Yeah, that woman. Caroline. Is it Caroline Gildert?
Yeah.
Psycho.
Yeah. Was it one time she posted something on social media about, shout out to all you queer witches or something like that. And anyway,
yeah,
but lots
why
of
is it just the queer ones?
But lots of symbolism out of the mouths and words of these hardcore scientists, yeah. And of course, a lot of people say, "Oh, they're just using that as a metaphor." But still, I think there's more to it. So keeping in the, as we've gone into the sort of the esoteric, I will credit my lovely Liz for mentioning a while ago, actually, about Stranger Things having elements of Gnosticism. So the character 11, Elle, she sort of creates the upside down, or she breaks down the barrier between that and the real world. So in some ways, she sort of creates it. So she could be compared to Sophia in the old Gnostic, the different versions of Gnostic belief. But so, as I say, 11.
Woody Black said, "Shout out to my cis witches." Yes.
The cis witches are happy. So 11, as I say, she sort of breaks down the barrier to the upside down. She calls the head scientist in the laboratory who molded her in this version of like MK Ultra Montauk within the series. She calls him Papa. So the Gnostics believe that there was an original creator father who produced the aeons, similar to angels, and Sophia was the last of these. And then so Sophia then creates, or she conceives not in the correct way without the approval of the father, and she conceives the demiurge. So this is without the involvement of a male partner. Some that could have some repercussions for the queer witches. And her child is the demiurge, which is a misshapen, belligerent creature that is utterly unlike the other heavenly beings.
We're next door.
Lisa said her next door. I don't know if you heard that. Liz, also, to credit Liz, she was saying that this Gnosticism belief in how the material world was created is centered around a lost child. I suppose, which I thought, yeah, wow, yeah, because the demiurge is basically a lost child, because it becomes cast out because Sophia realizes a horrible mistake, casts her child out of the Pleroma, which is the Gnostic version of heaven, inhabited by eons, and then demiurge, now alone, lost, you could say, believed that he was the only one being who had ever existed, and created the material world out of his ignorance, foolishness, and malevolence, trapping sparks of divinity within Adam and Eve along the way. Going back there to what I was saying about the sparks within all of us, which is strongest as a child, and that's what nefarious people want to tap into. Because of her fall and its dire consequences, Sophia became a flawed being. Her deficiency rendered her unable to remain in the perfect fullness of the Pleroma, so she was placed just outside of it, in a realm above that of her malevolent son. In anguish, Sophia repented, and the father agreed to bring her back to the Pleroma once what had become lacking in her was restored to its natural fullness. Actually, that makes me think, because would be in the fourth series, 11 loses her powers, and there's a whole thing where she's taken back to the lab and reunited with Papa, which is played by, was it Matthew Brodeen, who was in Back to the Future. One of, like I was saying, with Winona Ryder, but there's various other characters as well, like where actors and actresses played significant parts in landmark films of like the 1980s and around that. So,
what's her name in the last one?
Linda Hamilton was in the last season, obviously famous for.
Should not have been a baddie. I didn't agree.
Obviously from Terminator fame. There was a character in the fourth series, I think, that was played by is it Robert Englund, the guy who plays Freddy Krueger in The Nightmare on Elm Street. So there's so many references throughout, which is another enjoyable aspect of the series, to get the references to the old films and stuff. It's enjoyable. I enjoy it as entertainment.
That makes it like time traveling as well, that they do that.
Yeah. So
it makes nostalgia. It makes us go straight. Us Gen Xers. It's like we get in a time machine. That's why I loved it so much.
Yeah, I think that is undoubtedly true, and I think I wrote about this a bit in my Lost Child book. Obviously, that came out pre Stranger Things and stuff, but so yeah, the series in itself is a bit of a time warp, is a time capsule type thing, you know, because
I do love it. Yeah,
so that is another aspect where you've got mixings of time. But yeah, so, and then another aside, Sophia, of course, was chosen as the name for that blooming robot. Here we've got a picture of her.
Demon.
So a prototype robot, and she was given Saudi Arabian citizenship, which was
she's got more bloody rights than the actual women, I know.
Well, yeah, that was a number of people said that. So the robot I read was produced in 2016, which was the year that Stranger Things came out. Just aside, coincidence. But I do think the promotion of transhumanism, AI, is a lot of that is about to replace real children, the children which those in power want to either destroy, control, or use to tap into their inner power. But the robots, the AI, are being put out there as being another, and how they can combine with humanity, supposedly, in transhumanism, has been put out there by a number of these dodgy people as being the next development of humanity. So, if you like, they are talking about how, we can be replaced, and how these are, if you like, I suppose, the children of humanity. They are going to be our offspring. But are they like the demiurge, the misshapen, ugly, and
her next door,
and malevolent like her next door, that are going to actually cause destruction, or to create a new world which is going to be not such a nice place to live in? Inhuman, yeah. Well, which it will be. I mean, by the very definition, it is. These mad people want, that they admit it, obviously, they want an inhuman reality. That goes into what Bacco was saying about the whole climate crisis, that we are too many people, so we're better if millions of us weren't on the planet. And then, oh look, we can replace those people with these nice robots and AI, and they won't mess the place up as much. There won't be a scourge on
Kick it in the face. I'd even kick the children ones in the face.
There you go. That's a bombshell from my wife. When she says the children ones, she means robots, not any human ones.
Except her next door.
Right. Except her next door. Right. Okay. So. Right. So when they're finding their way through Henry's memories, this Henry who became Vecna, this big villain monster. So they're within his memories, and they're trying to find a shortcut to where he is in this alternate dimension where he's abducted these kids, including Holly. And then Max takes Elle and Carly, the ones with psychic powers, through this school corridor. So this is back again. It's like a bit of a time warp through memories. And it's first they're going through like school where sort of Joyce and Henry, the older people, where they were, and then it goes into, I haven't got a photograph of it, but this sort of ritualistic style dance with ghost masks. It all looks very, very weird and esoteric. It looks like the sort of the Scream masks they're wearing it. And apparently within the narrative, that's supposed to be a play written by Joyce Byers, who's Will's mother. So, and that's supposed to be her as a child. But then as the curtain closes across the stage, they then can go through the curtain, and that takes them through to where Henry's house is on this alternate dimension. And he's got these kids, and they're all hand in hand, and it's very much like a satanic ritual because they've got the candles around, and this is him using the kids and supposed to be drawing power from them to draw this other world to come through. And that's very much, again, that's like the whole, was it Wormwood, the whole Judgment Day type idea that there'll be and of course a lot of people have talked, and there's been things like Three Eye Atlas recently, as Ben has talked lots about, but it's from Revelations, isn't it? Like in the end times, there will be like this other planet called Wormwood will come in and either collide with the Earth or cause lots of destruction. Liz,
Black says it might be like R2D2. That'd be really nice.
Absolutely, I'm going to get a nice, lovely one.
I'm going to punch it in the face.
Liz is going to punch it in the face. So there's definitely something that it looks like it's some sort of satanic ritual, and again, sadly, there's so much about satanic ritual abuse, and again, how that's used children to get supposedly some power for the scumbags that are doing it. And this again relates back to the 1980s, because it was during that time that there was headlines, this country and America and probably other places as well, and there was this whole thing about a satanic panic. And there was a lot of those stories were then discredited, and it was said, oh, this is all it's all been made up. And I know there was some, or the well-known one in Britain was in Cleveland, and it was this group of social workers, and it was like, came down the event, they manipulated what the children were saying, and they sort of led them to say things. And the thing is, some of these things may well have been manipulation, and we know certainly in terms of social workers and other professionals in different industries, they do manipulate, and again, that's been another thread that's gone on over the decades of manipulating how people perceive things and that sort of thing. But I think a lot of the satanic panic thing was also because now any mention of it, satanic ritual abuse, is completely shut down immediately in the mainstream, and people just say, oh, it's nonsense. It was disproven back in the 1980s. It was kids making false accusations. They're being led to it by unscrupulous people for whatever reason. And any mention of it now, the kids don't get believed. And I think it goes back again to the 1980s. That was a time when it exploded into the media, and then it was quickly discredited. And then that's been a lasting discreditation that has persisted now to our present day. So again, I think that's a very significant thing that happened in that decade. And that was all, it's alluded to within Stranger Things, the satanic panic idea, particularly season 4. So there's because the Dungeons and Dragons is a big theme obviously throughout the series, because the kids play it, and then they sort of give the names from the monsters in Dungeons and Dragons to the actual monsters that are chasing, that sort of thing. But in season 4, there's all this stuff about this Hellfire Club which they have for playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it's quite a big marketing thing now. You see people in the street with the Hellfire Club T-shirts from the series, and there's a lot of stuff within the narrative of that, because the leader of the Hellfire Club. Was it Eddie, one of your favourite characters?
Yeah.
So he gets falsely accused of murdering this girl Chrissy, when actually it was this monster Vecna from the other dimension. But he's blamed for it, and then there's all this narrative where these sort of jocks going after him, and they're like, he's a freak, he's into devil worship, Satanism, and there was stuff, I think, in the press around Dungeons and Dragons, and it promotes Satanism, and so there was tie-ins there within the narrative of Stranger Things, of that satanic panic going on. But again, you've got all these different interesting twisting and turning of connections and analogies and things, because Hellfire Club was a term used to describe a number of exclusive clubs for high society rakes, as one website referred to them, in Great Britain and Ireland in the 18th century.
We had it in our quiz, didn't we?
You did, yeah. So the first official Hellfire Club was founded in London in 1718 by Philip Wharton, 1st Duke of Wharton, and a handful of other high society friends. And the most notorious club associated with the name was established in England by Francis Dashwood, met irregularly from around 1749 to around 1760, possibly up until 1766. So there was an incarnation that met at the George and Vulture Inn in the 1730s, and this version's club motto was, I won't try and read it out in French, but do what thou wilt. And that's the philosophy which Francois Rabelais' fictional abbey at Felame, and then later used by Aleister Crowley. So yeah, a lot of people have alleged that these Hellfire clubs did used to do a lot of nefarious things, and it wasn't just about posh blokes getting drunk and behaving badly, just in terms of being loud and obnoxious, but there was actually maybe a bit more to that. So I just read here, according to at least one source, their activities included mock religious ceremonies, partaking of meals featuring such dishes as Holy Ghost pie, breast of Venus, and devil's loin, while drinking Hellfire punch. That seems quite tame. Members of the club supposedly came to meetings dressed as characters in the Bible. Makes me think there of the whole spirit cooking thing, but there were serious. A lot of people say that some really dodgy things happened at the Hellfire Club, or versions of it. After Wharton's club was disbanded, Wharton became a Freemason, and in 1722 he became the Grand Master of England. So again, as I mentioned before, there's all these checkerboard floors like the Freemason lodges that appear throughout Stranger Things. And in the final series, it's on the floor of the radio station where the kids hang out, and on shoes. But I was going to say that from the radio station, it made me, because that a connection again with media and entertainment, and those things, and how, also broadcasting and technology, and connected with these things, and how that about mind control and manipulation, and that's where the checkerboard floor is on the final series. So just again, that connection between the occult, secret societies, technology, and the media, entertainment, all sort of in a nutshell, like in that image, if you want. So the Duffer Brothers, the two brothers who were like the directors, the creators of Stranger Things, they apparently came up with a synopsis, originally thinking of a narrative inspired by the concept of the 2013 film Prisoners, which I've never seen. I don't think you'd even really heard of it, but which details the moral struggles of a father going through when his daughter is kidnapped. And they were thinking about then expanding it out over 8 or so hours in a serialized television approach. So right away, it's from the official story anyway, from the first inception, it's around a lost child, and that's the primary ethos, if you like. That's not the right word, but motif. We'll go with motif. Thank you. So there's a central theme of the series, but then they focus, it says, on the missing child aspect of the story, and wanted to introduce the idea of childlike sensibilities they could offer, and toyed around with the idea of a monster that could consume humans. The brothers thought the combination of these things was the best thing ever. So from that, Lost Children was central at the outset, and then the fantastical ideas emerged from that. And again, that sort of goes back to my book, The Lost Child in Literature and Culture, just to throw it out there again. So
you've written a book?
I've written a couple, actually. The Lost Child archetype is a material, real tragedy, which is a massive rupture in our societies. And out of that is a metaphysical rupture in our reality, which disrupts and traverses the boundaries between dimensions, disrupts time. All of these things become other to what we perceive them normally. So just to quote again, I just got this from Wikipedia about the origins of Stranger Things. So to introduce this monster into the narrative, they considered, quote, bizarre experiments we had read about taking place in the Cold War, such as Project MK which gave a way to ground the monster's existence in science rather than something spiritual. So for me, I would say, as in the crossover between science and spiritual in the Child in Time novel, scientific concepts such as quantum physics and plasma are different ways of expressing the metaphysics of many spiritual beliefs, consciousness, supernatural. But I mean, what they refer to as bizarre experiments like MK were actually sickening and traumatic. So rather than be dismissed as madcap ideas, they should be properly considered as the attempts to manipulate and control people and disrupt perceptions of reality. So I guess that part of that obviously is about mental disassociation and
they're kind of dismissing it by saying that.
Yeah, they are, because they're making it. So the original working title for the series was Montauk.
Yeah.
So again, I won't go into detail about Montauk here, but that's something that hasn't been officially acknowledged, where MK has. But the Montauk project was, obviously there's lots of stuff on the internet about which people will be familiar with, but huge numbers of children again were supposed to be kidnapped, used for trauma-based mind control experiments with an emphasis on trying to create and discover telekinetic and psychic powers. So that's where they got the idea from, for obviously this experimental thing that was happening to 11, which gave her these powers. And that's where the storyline came from.
Elohim.
Well, yeah, 11 is known as El, and then of course that could correspond to Elohim as well. Like I say, there's so many references to like old religions and symbolism and different folk tales and that sort of thing. There's a little bit of a link back again, a little reference back to Montauk, just right at the end of Stranger Things. Hopper and Joyce are proposing to maybe move away together to a little place called Montauk, which is actually not it's in New York State, I think. So
I know they said there's going to be one last follow-up.
Yeah. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if some. Well, I know there's some sort of spin-off things coming up, but wasn't Montauk as well? That was wasn't that where Tesla had his tower?
Yeah.
In Montauk as well. So it's definitely got a lot of associations there. I think I've read things before saying there was, Native Americans that were indigenous to the area as well. That there was a lot of legends and things about it. So that there is something about that. There is something about that area, I think. But then, it goes on to say, the Duffer Brothers then chose the year 1983 as a setting for the first season, as it was a year before the film Red Dawn came out, which focused on Cold War paranoia. And then they were able to use all their personal inspirations from the 80s, which is when they were born, the decade they were born. and then obviously bringing all these things about film, science fiction, and horror from that sort of era. And I mean, the Soviet Union is prominent in later seasons, and that is also significant because the Soviet Union did a lot of experiments as well, as did the Americans and others, into the esoteric, and trying to get, break through reality, use things as a weapon, psychic powers, that sort of thing. So they were very, very deep into that. I think, was it Thomas Sheridan mentioned, I think after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was some conference in America which all these really powerful people went to, when there was all these sort of about these things that were
getting
now
all the books or something.
Yeah, things that were becoming revealed about experiments that had gone on when it was the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of links there. But I mean, to me, there's so many layers. So that's definitely one about the whole Cold War thing. But I think, and I suppose that is another important element of the 1980s. I suppose that was something I don't remember. It didn't affect me as a child. I don't remember.
It bloody affected me.
Yeah, I know it did a lot of people.
Terrified.
So again, that I guess was very crucial to the whole zeitgeist. And again, that's fears, and I think Ben's talked about, that was it threads and where the wind blows or whatever, and all these
terrifying
fear mongering stuff about that it's going to be the end of the world. So again, that's a splitting of reality and bringing to consciousness that it's an end times coming. Yeah. History repeating. What a surprise! Because the same arseholes are controlling it again.
You've got one fucking playbook.
Well, yeah. And I mentioned before that there was this other character who was experimented on, like 11, and had powers like her, which her number is 8, but her name is Kali. So obviously not more esoteric connections there. They could have chosen other names, of course, Indian related names. But yeah, as Liz mentioned before, the goddess of darkness and destruction, also revered in Hinduism as the bringer of creativity, as one must follow the other. And then the references are called the Kali Yuga. So you've got this period of thousands of years of
darkness.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying the yugas are different, thousands of years at a time. So we're just coming out of Kali Yuga now, aren't they? But yeah, Kali Yuga is the dark period.
The lowest point.
The lowest point. So our world is just emerging now. So
some might say the upside down.
Yeah. So again, it's just about shifting perceptions, shifting consciousness, shifting ways, the reality of the material and other dimensions, and how, like you say, the upside down, the flip side of the dark and the light. And I think that there's something there, because Stranger Things is maybe the best known one, but there's a number of other powerful sort of series or films that are connecting the ideas about childhood, lost child, and around disruptions on time and reality. There's there's a German streaming series called Dark. I don't know if people have seen that. I know Ben Anthony Peake has posted and written something about that. He's very impressed with Dark. I seem to remember when it came out. It came out maybe just around the same time as Stranger Things, or maybe just after. But it was German, so you can get it on Netflix, I think. But I think it was sort of referred to as the German Stranger Things. But I would say it's darker in many respects. There isn't the lightness. Stranger Things does a lot of entertainment and humor as well. Dark was more unremittingly dark, as the name is. But again, you've got this idea of children being sacrificed, basically, to get some sort of energy, and you've got all these repeating time cycles and sort of time travel going backwards and forwards within this small town. And it's centered on the adult culture as well, but focusing particularly on children characters. But yeah, going through different times and dimensions. And the film Donnie Darko is one that I really love as well, and that's got so many different layers to it. And again, both those things. Well, Donnie.
It's so sad that film.
Dark does go to other eras, but in the first series, it's very much about going from the modern day into the 1980s. So again, it was very much around the 1980s initially. And then the sort of later episodes, they sort of had a leap into the future and that sort of thing. But it was very much centered around the 1980s to begin with.
It's always the 80s.
Again, and Donnie Darko again, that is set in the 80s. So again, the choices of these people to set it there, as Liz said earlier, it's like you're making a sort of time travel in a way, just by setting the film in the past like that. And I mean, I suppose.
What's his name? That bloody thing with that bloody car.
Back to the Future.
Yeah,
well, funny enough, although I haven't really mentioned it in the article, I did sort of. I think I mentioned it in a title or something for the blog article, Back to the Future.
Oh, and that is in Stranger Things. You know, when they're high as kites after the Russians, they go into the bloody cinema.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's on in the cinema.
Right.
That's the future, and they're like, did he just kiss his mum? So that's even in there.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, because there's so many references to, 8 films around that time. But yeah, I mean, Back to the Future again. I know that's another one that's people have written in such depth about.
Oh yeah,
allusions to 9/11 and so again, yeah, you've got that era around childhood and going back to the 1980s, and this is I think there's definitely something formative, particularly around that decade, being manipulated and being made to be a crucial point in time, because it's when they knew that they were shifting things technologically and going into a different era of things.
Timeline, some people think.
Well, yeah, there's that as well. So that could be the reason for all these films being set there. So I think there's a lot more to explore here, as I say, connecting it in with what I've researched previously. So I hope you've enjoyed some of my musings on this particular stream and the little musings from out of sight of my wife.
Painting the bloody door.
You're painting the esoteric door.
Painting
the esoteric doors going on here.
Yeah.
So it's all the artistic kitchen, the soul kitchen. So much love to you all. Thank you very much for listening and watching.
I'm going to the Crafty Optimist.
I was about to say that.
Lies.
Yes, please check out lovely Liz's channel, The Crafty Optimist. If you're missing, you just had little snapshots there, but if you're missing some of her
Gobby shite.
I was going to say sparkling repartee, but gobby shite.
Spat coffee.
Gobby shite.
I'm going to spat coffee over the esoteric door.
Gobby shite and deep insightful things.
There's none of that.
Art and head matters. But yeah, go and check out The Crafty Optimist as well. Yeah, green tea. 80s were when a lot changed. Remote controls, cable TV. Suddenly the TV was raising the children. That's a very good point. Actually, in that Child in Time book by Ian McEwan, he was inspired by Joseph Chilton Pearce. That was one of the people who wrote really interesting stuff, talking about childhood and about the different ages of childhood, and literacy was introduced too early, and that fractured the child's mind, worldview, and that's interesting, I suppose, because that's done in a more extreme way, as what the whole MK Ultra thing is about, shattering the child's worldview, and so yes, the technology, the TV, that, let's say, the importance of media stroke entertainment and technology, and it did become the way it manipulate children, I suppose, because we are children of the 80s, and the references to all these films and TV and stuff that we loved as kids, I suppose, though, like we say, a lot of them have got deeper meanings to them, and I suppose in a way we're celebrating the fact that we were being manipulated at the time. But I suppose if we can peel back the layers and see the deeper levels, then we can still enjoy them as entertainment. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and looking back and getting some fun and entertainment and enjoyable time still from it. But to me, it was always the same when I was doing literature and stuff. I don't mind looking back, looking in and getting the deeper levels. To me, that just has different elements to it, but still fun. So anyway, on that bombshell, see you all soon. I'm off to Cambodia. I'll post some images, and we'll speak to you all very soon. Lots of love to everybody. Bye.
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 Hit that like, subscribe, and share.
Hit like, subscribe, and share.
Subscribe and subscribe.
And to the Crafty Optimist channel.
Subscribe.
Thanks,
and
Green
share.
Tea. Cheers, Vector John. Cheers, Whisper Room. Bye bye.